Getting myself all ready for this, all ready for this, all ready for this. All right, this is how we get started. Everything's set up, good to go. All right. Ms. Legalista here. Thank you for joining the video. Now, today I'm going to be talking about fake job interviews, applications, callbacks, all of that. And I'm going to be talking about one employer in particular, Wells Fargo Bank. Now, if you saw one of my previous videos, then you know, yes, I did talk about the fact that sometimes there is an upside to this, in that, yeah, they already have all of your information and you might have looked good on paper. And so now they're thinking, hey, let's go ahead and call them back. You might have first dibs on that job, mostly because you went through the fake job interview process. But who wants to spend a lot of time doing that? I know I would not. I'm sure you would not either. You have better things to do with your time, like applying and interviewing for real jobs. But now we have this lawsuit that looks like it's going to be going forward. Well, it's not a lawsuit for all of those people who went through those fake jobs. No, it's not about them at all, at least not in that sense. It's more about the shareholders who feel like they were defrauded because Wells Fargo did these fraudulent interviews and said they were doing all of this great stuff. And it turns out it was all a sham. And then you had what? An impact on the value of the company. And if you're a shareholder, well, that's not a good thing. That's not a place you want to be in. So here we are now. It looks like this case is going to proceed further, advance, keep going. It doesn't look like this train is stopping. The thing about it is, you might ask yourself, well, what about all of those people who applied for those jobs? Where's the lawsuit for them? Like, hey, can I sue them for fraud, putting this job listing out there when they knew that the job had already been filled, or that there wasn't even a job anyway, that they had this policy that they put in place. And we're going to talk about that policy that they put in place so that they could look good to the world. This was basically about Wells Fargo making themselves look good to the world, and therefore make sure that their company was valued as high as it possibly could be valued. Well, yeah, you just can't go about putting all this fraudulent stuff out there and think that nobody is going to get upset about it and say, hey, you did something wrong. You should not have done that. Well, I'm going to jump into this lawsuit. I know I've been talking a long time. And if you've seen any of my earlier videos when I first started, I was definitely not this animated. But this one was just interesting because there is a New York Times article out that was recently released, published, or whatever you want to call it. And it goes into detail about people in particular who applied for jobs. And then guess what? You get to even hear from some of the employees who were a part of this process and say, oh, yeah, that was not a real job. That was not a real job. Yeah, we were just trying to meet this new policy that they put out there. Just a sham for the people who were applying for these jobs. But if you actually work for the company, how does that make you feel? If you decide, well, I want to level up, I want to apply for a management position, a director position over some region or something like that. Should I even apply? Because how do I know that the jobs I'm applying for, even though I'm in house, are real? How do I know if those jobs are real? So this is just a mess. It's a mess. I do not know what else to call it. It is a mess. It used to be we would be worried about scammers and fraudsters on a small scale, those sort of back rooms where people are sitting in there with all the phones. Gives you that vibe from, what is the name of that movie? Oh, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio, where Wolf of Wall Street. I think that's what the name was. It has that sort of vibe. When you think of scammers, they're kind of like, okay, in a back room, all on the phones, trying to get people to sign up for these deals that are just going to take their money and never deliver a service or product, something like that. Some sort of network. That's what I feel like. But then you go, well, here's a whole company, a financial institution, a banking institution that, if you can't trust the banks, well, I don't know that some people would feel like they could ever trust the banks. But let's go ahead and take a look at this lawsuit. Now, remember what I said, this is not about the employees or the people who applied for the jobs, the applicants. This is not about giving them some sort of restitution in terms of what they may have gone through, consequences, losing their time, them being defrauded. This is not what this lawsuit is about. This is basically about the shareholders, okay? Because information was put out there for them and for the world. Again, to make Wells Fargo look like, hey, we're doing what we should be doing in the world when it comes to, being really inclusive. Well, it turns out that that's not what was really going on with Wells Fargo. So let's take a look at this because I have been talking entirely too much. But if you have some thoughts about this, if you have ever applied for a job at Wells Fargo, definitely let me know in the comments. If you still work for Wells Fargo, you probably don't want to say anything, right? Like now is not the time to be like, Ms. Legalista, let me tell you what we did last month. Probably not the route you want to go because, everybody's following everybody on social media now. United States District Court, Northern District of California. And just so you know, I'm going to break this up into a bunch of videos, but I'm going to start with this really long one that goes over some of the details here. All right, so we have whoever this is. We've got this plaintiff here, individually and behalf of all others similarly situated against, we've got Wells Fargo and some of the people in the top leadership position, namely people who made certain comments. Going after these people. Look, watch what you say, in other words. We've got a class action here, complaint for violations of the federal securities laws and a demand for jury trial. Look at that again, because what did I say? This was not about people. This was not about people being defrauded in terms of the applicants. This is a complaint about a violation of federal securities laws. So we have this plaintiff who is suing. It says he alleges the following based upon personal knowledge as to plaintiff and plaintiff's own acts. It says a review of defendant's public documents. So they went through the documents, conference calls, and announcements made by these defendants. They look at what you see there here. Securities and Exchange Commission filings. They went through all this stuff. Wire and press releases published by and regarding Wells Fargo, analyst reports, advisories about the company, and information readily obtainable on the internet. They went through all of that. It says plaintiff believes that substantial additional evidentiary support will exist for the allegations set forth herein after a reasonable opportunity for discovery. Well, okay, so let's see what this action really is about here. I've given you sort of my take, my sort of understanding on what this sounds like. But again, this is going to be a lot of financial hoo-hoo. So I don't know, you may want to get a cup of something to drink, some snacks as we go through this and break this down. Paragraph number 1 says this is a federal securities class action on behalf of a class consisting of all persons and entities other than defendants that purchased or otherwise acquired Wells Fargo common stock between February 24, 2021 and June 9, 2022. Both dates inclusive the class period. This is a class period. Seeking to recover damages caused by defendants' violations of the federal securities laws and to pursue remedies under sections 10B and 20A of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. We're going to call that the Exchange Act, and Rule 10B-5 promulgated thereafter against the company and certain of its top officials. Remember, I said that before. They're going after the company and these people in top leadership positions that made these statements. Wells Fargo is a diversified financial services company that provides banking, investment, mortgage, and consumer and commercial finance products and services in the U.S. and internationally. In 2020, Wells Fargo expanded its so-called diverse search requirements, also referred to as a diverse slate hiring policy, requiring that at least 50% of interview candidates must represent a historically underrepresented group with respect to at least one diversity dimension, including race/ethnicity, gender, LGBTQ, veterans, and people with disabilities. For most posted roles in the US with total direct compensation greater than $100,000 per year. In addition, at least one interviewer on the hiring panel must represent a historically underrepresented group with respect to at least one diversity dimension. All right, so let's break this down for a second so that we can see what they're talking about here, okay? So they're saying at least 50% of the interview candidates must come from some of these groups listed here in parentheses. This is their diversity dimension. So at least 50% of the candidates that you say, hey, come on in, we want to talk to you. We want to talk to you. We're interested in you. They can have more than one diversity dimension, but they have to have at least one. And 50% of the applicants must meet that. And then it's not for all positions. Look at that. It says for most posted roles in the US, we don't care about the rest of the world, they said, in the US with compensation greater than $100,000 per year. So if the compensation is less than that, this particular policy is not really being applied to that. And then it also looks like on your interviewing panel, you have to have someone from one of these categories. All right. So now we understand what the policy is here. Throughout the class period, defendants made materially false and misleading statements regarding the company's business, operations, and compliance policies. Specifically, defendants made false and or misleading statements and or failed to disclose that one, Wells Fargo had misrepresented its commitment to diversity in the company's workplace. Two, Wells Fargo conducted fake job interviews in order to meet its diverse search requirement. Three, the foregoing conduct subjected Wells Fargo to an increased risk of regulatory and or governmental scrutiny and enforcement action, including criminal charges. Four, all of the foregoing, once revealed, was likely to negatively impact Wells Fargo's reputation. And five, as a result, the company's public statements were materially false and misleading at all relevant times. Okay, so how did all of this kind of get started? Or at least let's go to one of these main sources. On May 19th, 2022, the New York Times published an article entitled "At Wells Fargo, a quest to increase diversity leads to fake job interviews," citing discussions with 7 current and former Wells Fargo employees, including Joe Bruno, a former executive in the company's wealth management division. The article reported in relevant part that for many open positions, employees would interview a diverse candidate, but that often the so-called diverse candidate would be interviewed for a job that had already been promised to someone else. The article further reported that Mr. Bruno was fired after complaining to his bosses about the practice. Now, let me stop here for a second. Let's just all admit that this is not something new in the hiring industry, okay? In terms of human resources and employment, that plenty of times, even in government positions, a position is vacant, it is publicized and advertised and put on the internet, shared widely on social media platforms, and the people who are responsible for making sure that position gets filled really already have somebody in mind. Sometimes they may be somebody who is already employed with that entity or somebody outside that they have already had conversations with. So this is not really anything new. The concern here is that number one, it was so widespread. Number two, that they had a policy that made it look like they were actually doing something that they weren't really doing. And number three, you're just wasting a whole bunch of people's time. And number four, even your in-house people had a problem with it. Okay. Had it been one or two people a few times over the course of years, it probably would not have gone anywhere. Okay. We recognize that this happens when people are applying for jobs, that sometimes they already have somebody in mind. Some of you may have been in this very situation. You may have been in a situation where you were the hiring party and you really already had an idea of who you liked for the job. You may have even called them in advance and told them, don't forget to apply. Hey, the position opened today. Hey, it's closing tomorrow. Did you get your stuff in? Tons of people have been in that position. So this is nothing new. It's the extent to which this was done, the public statements and information that was put out there, and that it was just not true. So they were putting something out there that was false, that was fake, and based on things that just were not true. And poor Mr. Bruno, he was fired after complaining to his bosses about the practice. I think next time around, Mr. Bruno, I don't know, he may speak up. His new company may very well love having him on board because they may think he's someone with high ethical standards. All right, paragraph 6. On this news, Wells Fargo's common stock fell 44 cents per share, or 1.04% over 2 trading sessions, closing at $41.67 per share on May 20th, 2022. Now, that may not sound like a whole lot to anybody unless you own a whole bunch of those shares. Then all of a sudden you're like, well, wait a second. On June 6, 2022, Reuters published an article entitled Wells Fargo Pauses Diverse Slate Hiring Policy After Reports of Fake Job Interviews. The article reported that Wells Fargo is pausing a hiring policy that requires recruiters to interview a diverse pool of candidates. After the New York Times reported such interviews were often fake and conducted even though the job had already been promised to someone else. The same article also reported that the bank also plans to conduct a review of its diverse slate guidelines, CEO Charles Scharf told staff on Monday, according to a memo seen by Reuters. Then, on June 9, 2022, the New York Times published an article entitled Federal Prosecutors Open Criminal Inquiry of Wells Fargo's Hiring Practices. Now, let's take a pause here of our own, okay? Wells Fargo over the last few years has been through the ringer for some of the practices that it has carried out. There was the time that it opened fraudulently bank accounts on behalf of its customers without its customers' permission. Remember that whole one? Yeah, they have paid billions in fines over the years because of the kind of shenanigans that they engage in. So I'm not really sure why we actually think this is something new. This is like their modus operandi. Like, what fraudulent thing can we do now? Okay, that's my opinion, and maybe they'll come after me for that. The article reported that federal prosecutors are investigating whether Wells Fargo violated federal laws by conducting fake job interviews in order to meet the company's diverse search requirement. The article also revealed that since the New York Times May 19, 2022 article focusing on the bank's wealth management business, another 10 current and former employees have shared stories about how they were subject to fake interviews or conducted them or sought paperwork documenting the practice, and that sham interviews occurred across multiple business lines, including its mortgage servicing, home lending, and retail banking operations. Well, this sounds like a modus operandi to me. Let's just, do this sham thing all across the board. We're just going to make it part of our policy. Let's just put it in our SOP and share it without, across the organization. Yeah, this does not look good at all. You now have, in addition to Bruno, poor Bruno got fired. Now you have all of these other people stepping up and saying, oh yeah, this has been going on. That same day, Wells Fargo issued a press release entitled Wells Fargo Response to New York Times article, which confirmed that earlier this week, the company temporarily paused the use of its diverse slate guidelines, and that during this pause, the company is conducting a review so that hiring managers, senior leaders, and recruiters fully understand how the guidelines should be implemented. And so we can have confidence that our guidelines live up to their promise. Now, whoever the PR firm was, whoever is working back there in communications, like this is crisis communication 101. Stuff looks like it's going to blank in a handbasket, and you call them up and say, look, put us a statement together. We got to get something out now because this is killing us. The New York Times has done 2 articles with these people. Now these people are popping up. Poor Bruno got fired. This is a mess. Can you help us out? And then you get a statement like this, right? It's always, well, we're reviewing and researching, and we're committed to this. Like, you all know what these things say, right? All right, let's go on down. Following these disclosures, Wells Fargo's common stock price fell $3.68. That ain't change, y'all. Per share, or 8.6% over the following 2 trading sessions, closing at $38.99 per share on June 13th, 2022. As a result of defendants' wrongful acts and omissions and the precipitous decline in the market value of the company's common stock, plaintiff and other class members have suffered significant losses and damages. What did I just say? Those are not pennies. All right, jurisdiction here. We're going to skip all that. Okay. It's mostly, hey, we're doing this under the Securities and Exchange Act. Wells Fargo is located in the district. Yeah. The parties. Let's talk about who these parties are. Let's see. We've got Wells Fargo as a Delaware corporation with principal executive offices located in San Francisco, California, trades on the U.S. Stock Exchange. Then you have the defendant Charles W. Schorf has served as Wells Fargo's chief executive officer and president at all relevant times. Then you have defendant Michael P. Santamassimo. Am I going to have to say that throughout this whole thing? Has served as Wells Fargo's senior executive vice president and chief financial officer. Defendant Santos has served as Wells Fargo's senior EVP also. Carly Sanchez, Wells Fargo's EVP of Talent Acquisition. Oh, that's going to be an interesting one. And then it says defendants Schorf, Santamassimo, Santos, and Sanchez are sometimes referred to herein as the individuals. I mean, can we just say they are the S crew? Okay, they're the S crew. There are 4 of them. I don't know what else to call them. Okay, the S crew. The S crew possessed the power and authority to control the contents of Wells Fargo's SEC filings, press releases, and other market communications. In other words, these were the people who were putting those statements out there. The individual defendants, the S crew, were provided with copies of Wells Fargo's SEC filings and press releases alleged herein to be misleading prior to and shortly after their issuance, and had the ability and opportunity to prevent their issuance or to cause them to be corrected. Hey, you should not have let them gone out, and once you knew they were wrong, you should have corrected them. It says because of their positions with Wells Fargo and their access to material information available to them, but not to the public, the S crew knew that the adverse facts specified herein had not been disclosed to and were being concealed from the public, and that the positive representations being made were then materially false and misleading. So they're like, S crew, you lied, or you knew about the lies, okay? The S crew, they are liable for the false statements and omissions pleaded herein. All right, let's jump into these substantive allegations, the background. I love this. Sometimes that's where the meat is. That's where the stories are, right? Paragraph 24, Wells Fargo is a diversified financial services company that provides banking, investment, mortgage, and consumer and commercial finance products and services in the U.S. and internationally. In 2020, Wells Fargo expanded its so-called diverse search requirement, also referred to as a diverse slate hiring policy, requiring that at least 50% of interview candidates must represent a historically underrepresented group with respect to at least one diversity dimension, and you see those listed there, for most posted roles in the U.S. with total direct compensation greater than $100,000 per year. In addition, at least one interviewer on the hiring panel must represent a historically underrepresented group with respect to at least one of the diversity dimensions that you see in those parentheses above. All right, so let's get into these statements that were made, because this is really the crux of the story. Remember, I said this really isn't about these applicants who had to go through this only to realize they didn't get a job. Some of them got a job later, but you're going through the process. And it's like, hey, can I go back into courts? Well, this is not that case. Okay. This is about these statements. This is really what it's about. The class period begins on February 24th, 2021, the day after Wells Fargo filed an annual report on Form 10-K with the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, reporting the company's financial and operational results for the quarter and year ended December 31, 2020. That filing represented that in 2020, we introduced a new set of expectations for everyone at the company, including, among everything, championing diversity and inclusion, which guide how we lead ourselves, collaborate with our colleagues, and make decisions, and which apply to everyone at Wells Fargo at every level in every role. The 2020 10-K also stated the following in relevant part regarding the company's purported commitment to diversity and related hiring practices. Meeting the increasingly diverse needs of Wells Fargo's global customer base is critical to our company's long-term growth and success. Wells Fargo values and promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion in every aspect of our business. We are dedicated to recruitment and career development practices that support our employees and promote diversity in our workforce at all levels of our company, including leadership positions. We have a strong record of recruiting, promoting, and rewarding women and racially, ethnically diverse employees at all levels of our company, including a commitment to increase diverse representation in leadership roles. So let me stop there. So how do you say you're committed to increasing representation and inclusion when really you're only doing it in a sham sort of way? Like the whole thing is fake to some extent? I don't know. Like this just reads horribly. If you have to go back and read it and put it up against the facts, it's just like, okay, so y'all wrote some really good stuff. It sounded good. Too bad you didn't really believe what you were doing and actually try to do it. I don't know. Let's go through this and let me stop talking. You guys let me know in the comments your thoughts on this. To demonstrate that Wells Fargo has successfully implemented its expanded diverse search requirement, the 2020 10-K stated in relevant part that at December 31, 2020, our global workforce was 54% female and 46% male, and our U.S. workforce was 50% female and 44% male. Making sure my stuff isn't burning back there. And that our U.S. workforce was 55% Caucasian white and 45% racially, ethnically diverse. Appended as exhibits to the 2020 10-K were signed certifications pursuant to the Sarbanes-Oakley Act of 2002, wherein defendants Schorf and Santamassimo certified that the 2020 10-K fully complies with the requirements of the Securities and Exchange Act, okay? And that the information contained in the 2020 10-K fairly presents in all material respects the financial condition and results of the operations of the company. On March 16, 2021, Wells Fargo filed a definitive notice and proxy statement with the SEC saying that in the U.S., we are requiring a diverse slate of candidates, a diverse interview team for most roles with total direct compensation of more than $100,000 per year. Again, these are the statements that they're saying, the plaintiffs are saying, this was not true. This was, well, yeah, you got a policy that says something, but what you actually did was something entirely different. Paragraph 31. Additionally, the 2021 proxy stated the following regarding Wells Fargo's diverse candidate sourcing and interview guidelines under its diverse search requirement. All right, here's what they said. Consistent with our commitment to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, DE&I, and improve workforce diversity, Wells Fargo has established diversity sourcing and interview team guidelines that require diverse candidate slates and interview teams, referred to as our diverse search requirement. Our diverse search requirement was originally implemented based on our evaluation of the company's workforce and in order to determine how best to improve workforce diversity. Based on our ongoing review, the company decided to expand the scope of the diverse search requirement in 2020 as part of our overall continuing efforts to enhance workforce diversity. We define diversity for those purposes to include the following diversity dimensions: race/ethnicity, gender, LGBTQ, veterans, and people with disabilities. The diverse search requirement requires the following for most U.S. roles with total direct compensation greater than $100,000. At least 50% of interview candidates must be diverse with respect to at least one diversity dimension, and at least one interviewer on the hiring panel must represent at least one diversity dimension. And we went through those earlier. With further respect to Wells Fargo's diverse search requirement, the 2021 proxy also stated in relevant part, based on our evaluation of our workforce composition, the company determined that roles with total direct compensation above $100,000 presented the greatest opportunity for improving diverse representation at the company. For roles with total direct compensation less than $100,000, we have observed a historically higher level of diversity. Now, let me stop there because I want to make sure that you understand what they're saying here, okay? In other words, if you get paid less than $100,000, we have already made that diverse, okay? So the less we pay, the more diverse we are. The more we pay people, the less diverse we are. We got that. So as the more we pay goes up, as the salary goes up, as the compensation goes up, benefits, all this stuff goes up, the workforce at Wells Fargo is less likely to be diverse. And I'm just going to leave it there. As of December 31st, 2020, the scope of the diverse search requirement would have covered approximately 95% of all U.S. roles with direct compensation greater than $100,000 and approximately 48% of all active U.S. employees, irrespective of their total direct compensation. These roles include senior management roles reporting to our CEO, as well as job postings for covered U.S. roles, regardless of whether the candidates are internal or external. With respect to how Wells Fargo enforced its diverse search requirement, the 2021 proxy assured investors in relevant part. It said, let's see, any exceptions to the diverse search requirement must be approved by an operating committee member and one of their direct reports or their assigned delegate. In order to obtain approval for an exception, hiring managers must show that sufficient outreach efforts were made, including the use of a variety of sourcing activities to identify diverse candidates, and that despite those efforts, they were unable to meet the diverse search requirement. So here you have set up this scenario where there are quantitative numbers that have to be met. Remember, it's 50%. It's these dimensions. It's over 100K per year. And if you can't do that, well, okay, you can try to get an exception. What if you can't get an exception? Because you can't really tap into some of these sources that you thought you'd be able to tap into, or for whatever reason, even tapping into those didn't work. Well, now you could see why some people might then start doing sham interviews, right? Oh, well, let's scroll on. On October, how did I come up with October looking at April? On April 14th, 2021, Wells Fargo issued a news release reporting its first quarter 2021 results. That news release quoted defendant Schorf, I hope I'm getting his name right, who stated in relevant part, "We are keenly focused on the priorities I outlined last quarter." Well, I hope so. If they're priorities, I hope you're keenly focused and not just focused. I don't know. Our work to build the appropriate risk and control environment remains our top priority. This is a multi-year effort. In other words, y'all, we ain't got it right here. We're going to be working on it for a while. And there is still much to do. So don't throw us under the bus just yet. But I'm confident we are making progress. Yes, we are. Though it is not always a straight line. we're going to mess up sometimes. We are steadfast in our commitment to do this work, which should ultimately satisfy our regulatory obligations. So don't fine us just yet. On May 5th, 2021, Wells Fargo filed a quarterly report on Form 10Q with the SEC, reporting the company's financial and operational results for the quarter ended March 31, 2021. That filing stated in relevant part that Wells Fargo's top priority remains meeting its regulatory requirements to build the right foundation for all that lies ahead. And that while we have significant work to do, the company is committed to devoting the resources necessary to operate with strong business practices and controls, maintain the highest level of integrity, and have an appropriate culture in place. Well, I mean, somebody just threw that out the window, right? Appended as exhibits, certifications signed by defendants Schorf and Santamassimo. On May 10th, 2021, Wells Fargo issued a news release entitled Wells Fargo Joins 110 Coalition to Hire, Upskill, and Advance Black and African American Talent in the U.S. The news release stated in relevant part, 110 is a coalition committed to ensuring that Black and African American talent with the skills and aptitude to earn success also have the opportunity to achieve success. 110's mission aligns with commitments set by Wells Fargo to create a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable workforce at the company. These commitments include increasing recruiting staff for outreach to diverse communities, partnering with senior leaders to enhance focus on recruiting, promotion, and development programs for diverse talent, expanding participation in national diversity events, along with a commitment to potentially interview and hire on the spot, requiring senior leaders to identify and engage with external diversity-focused organizations related to their line of business or function, increasing focus on skills-based hiring, factoring DE&I metrics into senior leader compensation. Now, that last bullet right there, factoring metrics into senior leader compensation. You've heard that saying, what gets tested is what gets taught, right? It's sort of like what gets paid for is what gets done, okay? And so, if it's all about just hitting some metrics and showing some numbers and not really building a diverse group within your organization that is supported, that will move up through the ranks, that really will represent a culture that reflects the whole country, you can see how people might be trying to hit those metrics because they can then hit the money. I'm not saying that's what they did, but it goes back to that saying, what gets tested is what gets taught, right? What gets tested is what gets taught. Wells Fargo will begin the onboarding process that includes determining the number of jobs, geographic locations, new hires, and promotions the company will target as part of the commitment. Wells Fargo also will participate in quarterly community of practice gatherings that bring the leadership of coalition companies together to inspire and share information and best practices as each works to achieve goals of this commitment. There was actually something I wanted to say back about this, but I can't remember what it was now. So I guess I'll just skip it and go on. The same May 10th, 2021 press release, because y'all, the crisis communication team is now working overtime, weekends, and they are getting bonuses if they can help pull Wells Fargo out of this mess and get the value of the shares back up again. As we continue to drive change at Wells Fargo, we are excited to join the 110 Coalition, which can play a significant role in our efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion at the company and in the communities we serve. We are looking forward to working with 110 to find ways to alleviate some of the barriers that hinder advancement. Now I remember what I was going to say. The idea here is that you just want to make sure that you're opening the opportunity for people to know about jobs and apply to jobs, see what skills are needed so that they can start to get certifications or trainings or the education that they need. It really is about how do you find the best candidate from anywhere, from all of these different groups. If you've looked at any reports about how people get jobs, they will tell you time and time again. Usually it's through somebody you already know. It's through somebody you already know. So if your current pool of people who work for your company only fill in a certain group, then the people that they refer to you are probably going to be similar to them, maybe have some of the similar things that they do, hobbies that they engage in, values that they share, because they're going to say, hey, somebody I, hang out with in my bowling group, somebody else that I volunteer with, somebody else that I know on the PTA, and you'll say, hey, I want to pass their name along. And so you're passing along the same, people who may have the same contacts. It can be harder sometimes to reach beyond that group, especially if you aren't using different ways to share employment opportunities. But now we have the internet and everybody can go out there and find jobs. Problem is, a lot of jobs aren't posted. And we just found out many jobs sometimes might be sham jobs. They might not even be real. Okay. They already had somebody else in mind. So, really, we're just talking about opening up the world and giving a lot of people the opportunity to get these jobs. Y'all, you can't do anything without a job. You can't buy a house. You can't buy a car. I mean, unless you are independently wealthy, most people need a job. So, yeah. In addition, did I already say this? I already said that. So, yeah, 110 brings a unique approach. It says to identify a broader pool of talented candidates. Nobody's saying here we want bad candidates. Nobody wants bad candidates. I'm not going to hire somebody who I don't think understands how the legal process and the law works. I wouldn't do that. So you're looking to broaden the pool of the talent of people who are talented and who are a great match for Wells Fargo positions. On July 14, 2021, Wells Fargo issued a news release reporting its second quarter 2021 results. That news release quoted defendant Scharf, who stated in relevant part, I'm not sure. Our top priority continues to be building an appropriate risk. I'm worried about my candle back there. And control infrastructure for a company of our size and complexity. And we continue to invest in additional resources and devote significant management attention to this work. Yep. They had another filing in there that talked about, look, strong business practices and controls, maintaining the highest level of integrity and proper workplace culture. So then they issued another news release. What I tell you, I mean, you got to have your crisis communication team working overtime here, or your outside PR firm, because we got another. Can we get another press release out this week? How soon can we get another press release out? Somebody tell me what the timeline is. We are a different company today. Like, how long has it been? How long has it been? But we're a different company today. And the operational and cultural changes we've made are enabling us to execute with significantly greater discipline than we have in the past. I believe we are making significant progress in our compliance practices, and I remain confident in our ability to continue to close the remaining gaps over the next several years, though we may continue to have setbacks along the way. Now, remember, all of these it's not like this is happening in a vacuum. Okay. There are other things going on with Wells Fargo too. Remember, I said this is a company that over the last few years has been fined and had to pay fines and penalties hitting the billions. Okay. So we've hit that place, not millions. We're at the billion mark here. On November 2021, because now we're such a different company, right? Wells Fargo filed a quarterly report on Form 10Q. That filing contained the same statements. Again, commitment to compliance, strong business practices and controls, maintaining the highest level of integrity and proper workplace culture. It says down here, then we have another news release because, part of it is you put information out there, each quarter about how you're doing. So I don't want to beat them over the head too harshly about that. As a company, that's what you do. Okay. That news release quoted one of the S crew members. We have made sweeping changes to the leadership and culture. Really? Because you're still there. Made significant progress on our risk, regulatory, and control work, improved the efficiency of the company while investing in our business in a more holistic and aggressive way. Do we really need you to be more aggressive? And have taken a different approach to our customer and community facing responsibilities as a large public company. We continue our work to put exposures, liability, related to our historical practice behind us. Well, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. On February 22nd, 2022, Wells Fargo filed an annual report on Form 10-K with the SEC reporting the company's financial and operational results for the quarter year end December 31st, 2021. Like I said, we're just doing this, each quarter. There's nothing really out of the ordinary about this, okay? Commitment to diversity and related hiring practices. Then we have another, we have the 2021 10K that talks about the expanded diverse search requirement. It says our global workforce was 53% female, 47% male, and our U.S. workforce was 56% female and 44% male, and that our U.S. workforce was 55% Caucasian white and 45% racially or ethnically diverse. All right, we've got some more statements here again that focus on hiring and promotion. And really, this is what this case is about. It's like the S crew continued time and time again each quarter to put out these quarterly statements that said things like, hey, we are looking to help focus recruitment strategies toward unrepresented groups. Statements like this, right? You have another one, May 3rd, 2022. The filing contains substantively, the same statements as referenced in 35 regarding this commitment to compliance. I mean, it's the same. I mean, most companies, let's just give them a break here. Most companies are not changing the sort of the backbone and structure of what they're putting in these statements. Okay. So we're beyond responding to the stuff that got publicized because of the Times. Now we're putting out our regular quarterly statements, end of the year statements. What the plaintiff is suggesting is that they kept making these statements when they knew or should have known that some of those statements were not true and that they were false, and that they continued to put them out quarter after quarter after quarter when they knew something was wrong. So that's the issue here. They are putting this in this complaint to show you how they did it time and time and time again. Look here. All right, materially false and misleading because defendants made false and or misleading statements as well as failed to disclose material adverse facts about the company's business, operations, and compliance policies. Specifically, and you see it there, Wells Fargo had misrepresented its commitment to diversity. Yeah, because you're doing sham stuff. Wells Fargo conducted fake job interviews in order to meet its diverse search requirement. The foregoing conduct subjected Wells Fargo to an increased risk of regulatory and or governmental scrutiny and enforcement action, including criminal charges, because, they've been fined. For all of the foregoing, once revealed, was likely to negatively impact Wells Fargo's reputation. And 5, as a result, the company's public statements were materially false and misleading at all relevant times. The truth begins to emerge. This is where we are in the complaint now. We're at the point where the truth begins to emerge. On May 19th, 2022, the New York Times published an article entitled, "At Wells Fargo, a quest to increase diversity leads to fake job interviews," citing discussions with 7 current and former Wells Fargo employees, including Joe Bruno, a former executive in the company's wealth management division. The article reported in relevant part that for many open positions, employees would interview a diverse candidate, but that often the so-called diverse candidate would be interviewed for a job that had already been promised to someone else. The article further reported that Mr. Bruno was fired after complaining to his bosses about the practice. Let me go back for a second. Let's just do a quantitative sort of thing here. 7. Think about how many employees Wells Fargo has. So one could say, well, 7 is not a lot of people. 7 is not a lot of people. And in the grand scheme of things, I would agree with you. 7 is not a lot of people. But would you come up and make public statements like that and put your name out there. So you have a number of people who are probably not willing to talk. But yeah, but overall, this doesn't look like a high number of people, does it? But you got them in a New York Times article. On this news, Wells Fargo's common stock fell 44 cents per share. We already saw some of this. Despite this decline, Wells Fargo's common stock continued to trade at artificially inflated prices because defendants continued misrepresentations and omissions regarding the company's use of its diverse slate hiring policy. It says, for example, and you see here, diverse candidates and interview teams. Like, this is the company's diverse search requirement, and we saw that before. Compensation above 100K, these are the positions, and that 50% had to fall, within at least one diversity dimension, and then you had to have someone on that panel. It says the statements were materially false and misleading because defendants made false or misleading statements. Okay, so that sounds kind of circular, right? It was false because it was false. That's essentially what that just said. Like, you saw that, right? It wasn't just me, because that's what it says. As well as failed to disclose material adverse facts about the company's business operations and compliance policies specifically. And they go through some of those that we've said before. The truth fully emerges, I guess. Okay, so obviously I need to go back. The truth fully emerges. Wait, let me make sure I'm not getting weirded out here. Okay, the truth begins to emerge is where we were before, and now we are on the truth fully emerges. I just want to make sure I'm not losing my mind here as I read this, because we've been going on for a while now. On June 6, 2022, Reuters published an article entitled Wells Fargo Pauses Diverse Slate Hiring Policy After Reports of Fake Job Interviews. The article reported that Wells Fargo is pausing a hiring policy that requires recruiters to interview a diverse pool of candidates after the New York Times reported such interviews were often fake and conducted, even though the job had already been promised to someone else. The same article also reported that the bank also plans to conduct a review, I'm sure, of its diverse slate guidelines. Defendant Schorf told staff on Monday, according to a memo seen by Reuters, and we had heard that part before. Then you had this piece from the New York Times, publishing an article entitled Federal Prosecutors Open Criminal Inquiry of Wells Fargo's Hiring Practices. I really think I'm going to have to go back and, look at this criminal investigation here, what they said. I recently shared something where the FBI had actually set up a forum for an inquiry. It wasn't conducting. It was looking for victims of something that had happened. And they actually had an online form, and you filled out your contact information, and it asked you questions like, did you lose money? How much money did you lose? Questions like that. It could be they did something like that here too. I don't know, but it'd be worth knowing, right? As part of this. The investigation is being conducted. Let's go back. Federal prosecutors in New York have opened a criminal investigation into whether Wells Fargo violated federal laws by conducting sham interviews of minority and female job candidates, according to two people with knowledge of the inquiry. The investigation is being conducted by members of a newly created civil rights unit inside the criminal division of the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office, the people said. At Wells Fargo, one of the nation's largest banks with nearly 250,000 employees. Okay. Remember that number I just gave you? How many people did I say were in that New York Times article? At Wells Fargo, one of the nation's largest banks with nearly 250,000 employees, sham interviews occurred across multiple business lines, including its mortgage servicing, home lending, and retail banking operations. The Times report last month focused on the bank's wealth management business. Since then, another 10. And see, as people start to come forward, then other people feel safe about coming forward. It can be hard to be the first one, the first two, the first 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to jump out there and do this. Now you see another 10 coming forward, and I can imagine that there are more behind that. Since then, another 10 current and former employees have shared stories about how they were subject to fake interviews or conducted them or saw paperwork documenting the practice. The people spoke on the condition of anonymity because they feared retaliation from Wells Fargo or their current employers. There we have the R word. it will keep you from doing a lot of stuff. It really will. In some instances, there were written records of the practice of conducting fake interviews. That same day, during post-market hours, Wells Fargo issued a press release entitled Wells Fargo Response to New York Times article, which confirmed that the company had paused and was indeed evaluating its diverse slate hiring guidelines, stating in relevant part, no one should be put through an interview without a real chance of receiving an offer, period. The diverse slate guidelines we put in place are meant to increase diverse representation across the company. At the same time, it's important that implementation of our guidelines is consistent. Earlier this week, the company temporarily paused the use of its diverse slate guidelines. During this pause, the company is conducting a review so that hiring managers, senior leaders, and recruiters fully understand how the guidelines should be implemented. And so we have confidence that our guidelines live up to their promise. Like, this was going on across multiple divisions in the company, right? So let's not act like all of a sudden this was some sort of issue. This looks like it was part of your standard operating procedures. Because remember, there was this whole thing about metrics and meeting the metrics and probably getting possibly getting bonuses and that sort of thing. Following these disclosures, Wells Fargo's common stock price fell $3.68 per share, or 8.62%, over the following two trading sessions. As a result of defendants' wrongful acts and omissions and the precipitous decline in the market value of the company's common stock, plaintiff and other class members have suffered significant losses and damages. All right. So here you have the plaintiff's class action allegations, and we pretty much know, what they're alleging now. We've got more information behind that. They are specifically listing some of the questions of law and fact here, whether security laws were violated, whether statements made were, whether or not they misrepresented material facts. You see those there. Yes, and it goes on and on and on. Now let's go to the actual counts. And I'm not going to read all these, but I do want to just at least sort of go through these. So we've got violations of the Securities and Exchange Act. Let's see how many counts we have. That's count one. Then we have, oh my goodness. Okay, that just goes on and on and on. I think we're just going to have a few. I don't think we're going to have too many. We have count two. This is against the individual defendants. Okay. The crew S is, I think, S crew, I think is what we're talking about there. And prayer for relief. Okay, what are we asking for here? Plaintiff demands judgment against defendants as follows: determining that the instant action may be maintained as a class action, because that's what we're seeking here, class action. We want class action status. Please give it to us. B, requiring defendants to pay damages that have been sustained as a result of those statements that they made. C, awarding plaintiff and other members of the class pre-judgment and post-judgment interest, as well as reasonable attorney's fees, expert fees, and other costs. D, awarding such other and further relief as this court may deem just and proper. You know, that throw all one where you put everything up in there. Then you have the attorneys for the plaintiff. Let's see what else we have. Certification to federal securities laws. You guys, this stuff gets, I don't want to say boring, but yeah. So then you actually have the list of purchases and sales as to this particular plaintiff. So you can see the number of shares per unit or whatever it says here, the dates in which the transactions were going. So you have purchases over here, sales over here. Yes. I think dude was mad. And I say dude, I'm sorry. I think the plaintiff was entirely upset about what had gone on. So that's it. That's our, that's our case there. That's our case there. Fake, fake, fake. I'm going to do another video that actually looks at some of those articles and goes into detail a little bit more about what the applicants went through, because this is mostly again about what the company was saying and what the S crew was saying, the people in leadership positions of the company, and how they were making these statements that yes, we're committed to this and we're doing that, when it was all a sham. All right. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. You don't have to say whether or not you've worked for a banking institution. You don't have to give that info up. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and don't forget to subscribe. Peace.